Zombies are so in right now.
Resurrection is not nearly as cool as zombies.
Yeah. So I'm going to welcome everybody who's on our live stream. Welcome to Central Lutheran in Portland. This is Bible study that doesn't suck, and we're talking about life, death, and zombies. We who are here have some Bible texts in front of us on the first page. I will put them down here later, and then you can scroll down and find them. We have 4 texts today, and the first one, we're going to watch it on the video screen. So that's our first text, the Dry Bones CGI History Channel Bible movie.
History Channel Bible movie, huh?
History Channel Bible movie, which is the history of the Bible according to all the wars they could recreate using the same 4 costumes. It's a 10-part series. That version of the story always strikes me because they turn out to be like American war soldiers at the end. And I'm like rooting for them to be put back together until they're soldiers, and then I wish that I could reverse it. So that's kind of the Ezekiel text. The Mark text I picked because Mark is my favorite, but it's the story of Lazarus, Jesus' friend.
No, Jairus' daughter.
Oh, sorry, Jairus' daughter. The man who comes to Jesus and says, "My daughter is dead. My baby daughter is dead," and then the bleeding woman touches him, and then the word comes that the daughter is dead. Jesus goes to the house. Turns out she's a lot older, and Jesus revives her from death, and then he wants her to be fed.
Turns out she's a lot older.
Yeah, it sounds like she's a baby, and then it turns out she can talk.
She's 12.
She's like a teenager instead of a small daughter.
My little daughter is at the point of death in verse 23.
My little tiny daughter.
My little daughter is at death, and then you see in verse 42 that she's 12.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the part I always think it's interesting when they kind of, "Come quick, my baby's dying." Then our next text is from John, and it's the story of Lazarus, who is Jesus' buddy, but he hears that Lazarus is dying and waits 2 days to come and visit. And Mary and Martha kind of give him the stink eye when he arrives. And he's been in the tomb for like 4 days, is that right? And Jesus, this is the most of our zombie-like stories because he's actually all wrapped up in an old-timey zombie wrapping as he comes back out, and he smells bad as he is brought back to life. And then I added in here a Romans text. It's the text talking about how in our baptism we are resurrected, right? We walk through death and back to life through our baptism. And so I thought we could talk about these different zombie texts, and then, as I usually do in our Bible study that doesn't suck, I put forward something really radical that probably isn't true, but it's interesting to talk about. So,
Like, we're well grounded so far.
all the rest has been completely factual and no hyperbole at all. So my posit for us is, through our baptism, do we become zombies for Christ if we walk through our death and back through life? And is our evangelism, our slow, methodical walking, not to eat people's brains, but to infect them to be baptized zombies like us?
It's like Nadia, the one that turned her. Yeah.
There you go. That's right.
Vampire
Yep.
illusion there.
So these are the texts that I put before us. We can talk about all of them or none of them. What do you think, Amanda?
Thanks, Megan. Well, I think the YouTube video is really fascinating to have, because we know in theory when we read the Ezekiel text that this has been a valley where there was a war. And the bodies that are there, the dry bones that are there, that we sing in our, when we do vigils, we might sing, the head bones, ankle bones connected to the leg bone, like that song, we sing that, but I don't think that we recognize or think about the insinuation that this was a battlefield in which the prophet stood. And the people being raised from the battlefield are soldiers, are those who have been killed in battle. And so I think it's a wonderful kind of a reminder that when we talk about who is being resurrected in this particular prophecy in Ezekiel, we're not talking about women and children or that kind, we're talking about, or
That's
grandma.
what I always think.
You think of grandma coming back to
Yeah.
life, right? Or breathing dry bones into a dedicated, gentle community. This is breathing life back into the soldiers who have died on a battlefield. And having grown up near Gettysburg, having, that kind of in my family, a respect for our soldiers and a respect for battlefields. I think it's a powerful image to remind us that is who is being called back up. And then what does it mean that is who has been resurrected in this story? I don't know where to go with that, but I found that very, very fascinating. Others' reaction to the Ezekiel video?
You should see the rest of it. The other fascinating thing about this Bible movie is that Jesus appears all throughout the Old Testament in a creepy, cloaked way.
Neat.
And
Well, I
so,
thought
like,
that
lots being destroyed.
I thought this part was creepy. I
it's-
just thought it was totally creepy. I mean, it's one thing to, whenever you put images, visual images onto words, they go somewhere else,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yes to with soldiers and all that,
Yeah.
but it's just creepy, so I didn't like
I had a
it.
very
It's so poetic when you read it. And
I
you're like,
Well,
know!
it was Star Trek-ish. It was
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
transporting. I was like, let's put the bodies back on, yes.
But you
Earl
gotta
Grey
do
hot.
something with it.
yeah.
Thoughts?
What did you imagine about how the sinews were putting back on sinews and the blood back up?
The what?
It looked
She's
like you were going
volunteering you to say something.
Oh, well, talking about visual images, I just remember as a Catholic boy going through the catechism book, the images, they were something really weird.
Yeah.
Like the Holy Spirit looked like a Ku Klux Klansman,
Holy
with
goodness.
this
Yeah.
shroud over the head.
Yeah.
Creepy.
Yeah.
The thing that struck me in the text here, not necessarily the movie, but the text, but going back to the conversation we had this weekend on Revelation, where the question and answer, mortal, can these bones live? And then he answers, it's a question answer, kind of a dance about it, and the power of words. I don't know, the power of speaking. catches me. That's, oh Lord God, you know, speak to the bones.
It's one of those nana, nana, nana moments. I feel like God has a lot of nana, nana, nana moments. Like, oh, you don't think they can live, do you?
I know, so that's the point. The point is, they can live.
Yeah,
Not
God
the
can be
process that you
anything.
get there. I mean, the
Yeah.
video is kind of all about special effects and
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
like that, and the transportation of muscles
Yes,
and blah, blah, blah.
exactly.
It's kind of like, maybe that's why I don't like it. Although you liked it up until the very end, which was the
I
point.
liked it until the soldiers were there, and then it
Yeah.
was creepy. Because it
And
depends.
It was
it was
creepy
creepy.
way before that.
Then it was
But I
creepy.
think, well, I've seen it before, so
Okay.
my levels of creepy have weathered off. But I visited the Christ Redeemer statue in Brazil last week. And whether or not it's fantastic to have Jesus watching you all the time depends on if you think that's safety or judgment.
Sure.
And I think that same thing is true with resurrecting the soldiers. If you think they're safety, then that's amazing. If you think they're up to something or going off to an
Interesting,
unjust
yeah.
war, then it sucks that they're getting resurrected. And so much of it depends on where we think it's coming from. I like to think of Ezekiel as the text where God becomes mobile, right? Because God, it was thought, had this permanent throne at one spot in the world and held the world still in this one spot where the temple was. And then you could climb up the ladder and peek at God, or you could build a tower. And I love thinking of Ezekiel as the text where God gets one of those big red power scooters that shoots flames out the back. And whenever you get close, God can drive away and shoot flames at you to not overthrow God, like Ezekiel saw them. Ezekiel saw them. Right? So this is like a text of God being a little bit more like movable and changeable and surprising us by not just being stuck in one position. And this bringing life, like, if it's our child who's a soldier who died in war, of course we want that soldier brought back. If it's, if you think of the Holocaust, you don't want those soldiers brought back, right? So it's so dependent upon which
Perspective.
pile of bones is it, and what do you do with it once you got it? Do you think that people are going to use their resurrected life for good, or to be up to the same
Well,
stuff they
that's a
were up
question
to?
for me, because you said the series is biased by looking at all the war, what they can interpret as war. So
Yeah.
the fact
History
that they
Channel looks
were
wars.
soldiers doesn't mean God's resurrected in an army, I don't think.
Not
I mean,
necessarily.
I don't think,
Well, it depends upon which period of history. Onward Christian soldiers,
I
right?
know.
And is this
Yeah.
the swords to plowshare moment where he resurrects the soldiers, but now they get to have a new purpose of justice and peace in the world? We don't know because we stopped reading the text right there.
Yeah, all it says is that they will live.
Yeah. But in the Hebrew, that word life means spirit and soul and breath. And so it could be a whole body transformation. It could be that they get to have a complete life. Or that they bludgeon all the people who are batting against us. It's hard
This,
to know.
is this a post or a pre-exile? I mean, where are we at here? Because, I mean, I'm looking at the end of the text where it says, and I will bring you back to the land of Israel, in the sense of a new life and what that meant, and bringing the two back together.
It's true, because Israel's doing really well right now. Very peaceful, very knit together.
Or,
She's digging into it.
More of a
I know, really,
metaphor.
yeah,
I don't think that she
Metaphorical.
knows,
Right, right.
I don't know that Megan, you have a quite understanding of in this circle, there's some folks who might
Not understand my sarcasm.
No,
Not
no, I got
quite
the
catch your
sarcasm.
We're
sarcasm
talking
at
about
first.
biblical Israel and at what point?
Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? What's
Right.
going
We're
on
not talking
there?
about now.
Right.
Has
That's a whole
biblical
nother-
Israel ever had a happy, clappy time?
Well, but it was barely 200 years. I mean, it
Yeah.
wasn't even happy and clappy.
And they
during that
stole it
time.
from other people, right? It was somebody else's town that they stole.
Well, I can hear her sitting in the US, come on. I mean, everybody stole it from somebody else.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not
Yes.
everybody, but.
But most of us, I mean,
All of us,
historically,
But we
Very
very
slightly.
selectively read those texts.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Without realizing, I mean, I was had to dressed up in a little costume and sing a little song, and you know, and it would be the, you know, rejoicing of the walls falling down in Jericho. It's a very different experience to go to Jericho now and then go, oh, wait a minute.
Oh, crap, yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
that would be ethnic cleansing. I don't believe in a God that believes in ethnic
That's
cleansing.
right.
So that sends me all the way back to go, oh, gotta relook, you know.
Yeah.
I guess I'm looking at the zombies as being the zombies of hope, you know, and so it's like if the writers of the texts are looking at you know, painting a picture of hope, and if for the writers of the text, Israel is a good thing, the land at least.
Yeah.
You know, and then so they're painting this picture of, you know, maybe, oh, that's a good name of a band, Zombies of Hope.
the Zombies of Hope.
I like it, yeah, so, it'll be like this
Choir,
praise
the young
worship,
adult choir.
praise worship.
Yeah, we haven't defined zombie yet.
You're right,
Yeah.
you're right.
I think they're a flesh-eating, soul-sucking forms.
Not in churches.
I won't get into my sermon yet.
Right.
That's a good bishop
Yeah,
moment.
you're right.
But the punchline is, I'll put my spirit within you, you shall live, I'm gonna
Yeah.
take you home, and you'll know that I'm God. That's good, and I don't think that's soldiers. I mean,
It could be. It could be soldiers, and I mean, we think of our colleague Scott, right?
Yeah.
Who is serving in Afghanistan. And I think that the Spirit of the Lord is powerfully upon Scott,
Mhm.
preaching and speaking, and he is a soldier.
Mhm.
He is a non-combatant soldier, but he is a soldier. So I don't think that, you know, that it's impossible for there to be life and hope in the soldiers,
Oh, totally.
and in the work of God. And you know, violence is so hard. It's so hard to walk with that situation. But I think that God can absolutely work through those who are in horrible situations to try to bring about peace and light and life.
Or even if it's even just, like if you think of the death being PTSD for soldiers and the life that God breathes back into the soldiers is the ability to be present and to recover from war. I like that as a metaphor.
Yeah.
I think you can spin it into some great metaphors. But it's interesting when you're left with
Ready
The
for battle.
rifles.
Mhm. Kendra, did you have any thoughts? All right. I mean, this is kind of all new stuff, so
Okay.
when we do Bible study that doesn't
Didn't
suck.
I hear you're a biologist?
When we do Bible study that doesn't suck, we often, Megan and I, each week, we try to keep in mind that there are going to be people who have never seen these texts before and who've never heard these things, and we try to make certain that we don't just talk way over everybody's heads on things. I mean, is this a new text for you? And what did you hear in this text?
I
Hearing
guess
it
the
seems
question
first
is,
time.
if you brought them back, did they want to come back?
Yeah.
Depending
Yeah.
if they were heaven and hell, if you're in heaven, do you really want to come back? Hell, I would understand why they'd want to come back and have a second try. But I guess the question is, do they want to be back?
Yeah.
Because they say people who die, for example, hospital and come back, and they say they've been there kind of thing, they spend their whole lives wanting to go back. And you can't wait for that moment. So I guess when he's talking about bringing people back, do they want to come back?
Do they
Is
want
that
to
their
come
choice, or
back?
is he telling them to come back?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I was thinking too that this text reminds me of all of the cool science that's happening right now about trying to grow organs. Like
the
in-
3D
Yeah,
printers
either
stuff.
through
Have you
3D
heard about that?
printers.
I have not heard about this.
There's 3D printers. I don't really know how to describe it, but they successfully, I forgot what organ it is, but they successfully created it through this 3D printer, and it's
with like
working.
cells, right?
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
working with the girl's body. I don't know what it is, but it's almost be able, like, for example, their goal is like if someone needs a new heart or lung or anything to
Grow it from
be
the
able
bone
to
parts.
take their DNA and completely regrow it and transfer it.
Right.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's
Wow.
really
I don't
cool.
understand 3D printers,
Yeah.
let alone.
You're right,
It's
that's
like,
true.
and
I
I
don't
mean, I
understand
can't
how a
understand like the
CD
paper
works.
sculpture.
It's literally
works.
like what you're
Creatures
thinking.
of
It's
life.
it's like laser.
It layers.
It layers stuff.
yeah, this is
and
like,
it's
this is like,
cells.
together.
plastic or Play-Doh stuff, though, isn't it? I mean. is
But
it-
they can do it with
Yeah.
cells.
They can, huh?
Yeah.
They take one of your cells so
And
that
then
your
they
body
can,
doesn't
like-
reject it,
Yeah.
Wow.
Ooh.
Wow.
and they print it out.
hmm
So this just reminds me of some of the
It's
cool
almost like-
science.
It's almost like cloning, but people don't want to say it's cloning.
It's cloning, but without an embryo.
Yeah, it freaks
'Cause it's
people
your
out if
own
you say
cell.
cloning,
Right,
but it is in that way.
wow.
Yeah,
Where's the work being done?
I don't know, some university, I
over.
could look it up, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a couple different universities, Europe, here, Canada, I think is one of them.
Wow.
It's even on Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah,
Oh,
it
That's
is.
true.
It's
That's-
not the game theory, but
Then
that's.
it's-
Well, I wish.
Yeah, it is on the Big Bang Theory too.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah, it's factual.
But if this was a step-by-step guide in how to like cure cancer through printing organs, or that would be pretty neat.
That would be awesome.
I mean, because so often you hear angry pastors on TV saying that God's against whatever the next scientific development is, but this seems like a God who wants to knit the body back together and figure out ways to do that. I don't know, just a thought.
That I will buy. I
Right?
was like, where is she going with this? I was like, I don't know where you're going with this, but yeah, okay, I could go with get the body back and,
Yeah.
and,
Knitting the body back.
kind of
God wants us
resurrection
to
and-
be repaired from all the things that are
yeah.
unfinished and broken.
And here's not just the body, it's the whole community, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
People.
And I think there's something with verse 9 where it says, prophesy to the breath, prophesy and say, and prophecy, again, we talk about prophecy not being about telling the future, but that prophecy in scriptural terms is often about truth telling, like speak truth. Because and speak truth and consequence, right? Because that's what prophets do. They speak truth and consequence. If you continue to blah, 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 then blah, blah, blah. So if you continue to break your relationships and treat one another poorly, then you will be conquered and you will be taken away from what you know as home. Because we know broken communities don't work well together and they can be torn apart and misplaced and moved to a different place. So prophets are truth speakers. So here we hear this call, speak truth to this community that is dried up. Speak truth to this group of people that have died. So, I mean, if we're thinking about the video of dry bones and I end up thinking about, you know, the Gettysburg Field. And there are plenty of places in Europe where you could think of battlefields strewn with bodies. But if we step back from that, we think about what kind of things do we need to speak truth to our communities that are tired or dry, or
Congregations declared dead.
congregations that have been declared dead when they're waiting for resurrection,
Mhm.
right? And who can go through a cycle. I think we just had Bishop's Convocation this last week, and we were talking about vitality in congregations and the cycle that they go through, and that, you know, if a congregation is on this low cycle where they've been in decline, there is resurrection on the other side of that, one way or another. Even if it's holy closure, then there's a way to come up from that. Speaking truth will bring life back, I think. And I think that we don't like prophets for good reason, because they tell us the things we don't really want to hear.
I like the idea of verse 10 being one that you use to bless a veteran who's doing physical therapy to learn to walk again with a new prosthetic leg.
So that verse, I prophesied as God commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they lived and stood on their feet, a vast multitude. And if we do think about the vast multitude of our soldiers who are coming back and needing prosthetic limbs, and who do have traumatic brain injuries, and those kinds of pieces, especially for our TBI soldiers, walking again, talking again, reading again, seeing again, all those pieces. Physically, you don't know there's anything wrong, but a traumatic brain injury can completely change your life thoroughly. So it's a word of hope.
Yeah. My daughter and I watched the movie The Book of Life, and in there it talks about the land of the remembrance, which is a place of the dead in some Latina stories. And but what was interesting is that I'm thinking about this land of the dry bones, and in the story of The Book of Life, if your community remembers you, you will always be alive. And so there's sense of the prophecy and this word that was spoken, and tying it back to the table, and then as we remember what happened, and more than that, as we remember
Mm.
again. There's just that, the sense of life in that. So, good movie, by the way. That's just my
Mm.
little, yeah, Book of Life.
Mm.
So,
So I'm thinking of your point about kind of looking at this from the individual's perspective. You know, what is it? My dad was in China for 4 years during World War II and came back, and he would sort of glibly say, decided this was a bad way to solve property disputes. And then he became an attorney. So, for his life's work, you know. But this, I mean, the point of the text is, after all these people come back to life, they will know that I am the Lord, and that, that I have spoken and made this happen, brought you back to life, and I will act. And I'm just thinking about what's the realization like. Okay, this war was not the way to do this. You know, this what we did. I mean, we created our own damage here. We created our own exile here, whatever. But I mean, what's the upshot of coming back to life, being unzombified? I mean, whatever you want to say, you know, and realizing maybe we didn't do that right. And so what's the choice I want to make now?
How long were they dead?
Good question, I don't know that off the top of my head. How long are they dead? Anyone know off the top
Well,
of their
was
head?
it 40, 80 years probably, for its exile? So they would have been probably killed when Babylon came over and destroyed Jerusalem in that war, maybe. And then 40 years.
I just think of it as a different time because we perceive time differently than
Dead people.
God does.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you think 40 years our time, that's a really long time.
Yeah.
Mhm. Well, and it,
God's
When you
eyes.
get a little older, it's not feeling.
but it's long enough that for these who would be raised, that's 1 or 2 generations in
It's
that
2
time period.
generations,
And,
yeah.
and everyone
a
they
long
know
time.
would be gone.
Yeah.
That's why I asked the question, why would you come back if everyone was?
Well, and I keep wanting to jump text to the Lazarus text, because that's the
Okay.
question about
Do
the
it.
Lazarus text
Do
that has always struck me, is that no one asks Lazarus if he wants to be
Yeah.
raised. Jesus doesn't say, you know, Lazarus, come out if you want to. And I'm always wondering, I wonder what as Lazarus comes out all bound and he's like,
Or did he talk to him already?
that's-
They had a pact.
Yeah.
You're right.
If I die,
If I die,
you better get here.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can bring me back.
You
This
can
one's
wait a couple
okay.
days,
If
but
I die before you do. Yes.
if I die
But-
before I wake, you better get here within 2 days.
So I think important to me is our framing of you die and then you go to heaven or hell, so that you don't actually die, you just sort of go somewhere else. Would not have been the framing of any of these stories.
Right.
In any of these stories, when you die, you're just done. You're toasted,
Dust.
you don't exist anymore.
Well,
So,
and add
which
to-
is different than the way we look at that. So for Lazarus, it's kind of like, or for the soldiers, the choice is not, do you want to be alive here, come back to earth? The choice is, you just stop existing, would you like to come back and be in existence?
And for Lazarus, I mean, the important part of having him dead for 4 days is that he's really dead. I mean,
Smelly
there is
dead.
in some of the texts, we have the idea that if someone was dead for 3 days, their soul kind of just hangs around. 4th day, it's not in this text. It's not in the
No, I
text,
understand that, but is it
yeah.
actually 4 days?
3 or 4 days, it's a.
Not that it matters, but.
Verse 17, he'd been in the tomb for 4 days.
For 4 days.
Yeah. So he's really dead. I always think the Princess Bride in here. So
Yeah,
I'll be
yeah.
a movie guy. I'll keep
I
bringing
like
it back to the movies.
Yeah.
But you know, he's not just partially dead. He's fully dead.
Really, really
He's
dead.
really dead.
Really,
Um,
really.
And so much that he stinks. I mean, in the sense that there's already a stench from the tomb. Yeah.
Well, and
Do you know where we are?
Yeah.
there's an old Gnostic
John?
text, one of the 300 and some other versions of the gospel that wasn't voted in by the white guys who decided.
All right, pause for a moment. We're all people who know these things. Gnostic texts, for those of us who do not know, there's more than just the Bible texts that are in the world. There are many, many other texts that were written at the same time as our scriptures that have been accepted into what's called the canon being the books that are in our Bible. And so there were a lot of other books that were also written about Jesus, about the things that happened during Jesus' time, that didn't make the cut for what we know as our scriptures.
Why not?
Why not is a great question.
A group of
And-
white guys voted.
No, not
Yeah.
fair.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, right.
I'll go with people of power, or I'll go with God.
It's true. It was 150 preacher pastors.
So we're all
And
male.
they were all male, but there were
Yes.
150 of them who came together in a council to vote. And there's really interesting and fascinating history around that, and we can go into that maybe another time. But just for this conversation to know that there were many, many other things that were written at the same time, and we have some of them as well. And we have some that date from the same time as our scriptures. And the way we receive those is there's a papyrus that has the Greek writing on it, and we can carbon date that back to the same time as the papyri that have our writing that is canonized. And so the information was not accepted into our Orthodox faith, but it is present and we can read it.
And it's cool, some of it. I'll put a
Some
link,
of it
if
is
you're
cool.
watching on the video, I'll put a link down here. It'll be called the Nag Hammadi text, because they found it with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it'll be right down here. There's a particular text that I think is fun to talk about
I have the
in
book in
connection
tomorrow. Okay.
with this, and that's, it's a story, so the stories about Jesus in our Bible, if you're reading Luke's gospel, you've got some before Jesus was growing up. There's this shenanigan with him in a temple where maybe he's 12-ish, and then it kind of skips to where he's in his 30s. And so there are some of these texts write about what they think might have happened when Jesus was a little kid, or in these adolescent times, which I hope they don't ever write a book about my teenage years, because I'll vote not to include that in the canon.
Right.
But there's this great text. One of my favorites is Jesus is playing with mud, and he's making like mud pies, but he's making doves that then fly away. And he's up playing on the top of the roof, because at the time, the way you lived in your house is you had the animals on the first floor, the lifestyle stuff like on the second floor, and the playing on the roof so that no one could come and sneak up and get you. And so they're playing on the roof of the house, and Jesus gets really mad at one of his friends, like angry mad, does it on purpose, shoves him off the roof of the house, and the kid dies. Jesus gets in a lot of trouble, like you do when you kill your friend. Right? And Jesus
I
argues.
never got in trouble.
Yeah.
Outside of my experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Jesus gets in trouble by the adults in the situation for killing his friend. And Jesus argues, why am I getting in trouble? I can just bring him back to life. And he brings the kid back to life and says, you all should really get over this. I should get points for bringing him back to life, not for having gotten angry. So there's no anger management section in this text, so you might see some of those anger outbursts later. But what's really cool about that is that there are many stories like this, and just a number of stories throughout ancient writings that are about anyone who's important, where that person would be able to bring people back from the dead, to get you ready for the fact that if your biography is important enough, it will end with you coming back from the dead. And so it's possible some of these stories, like Jairus' daughter and Lazarus, is for you to, if you're going to be unbelieving about the ability to bring someone back from the dead, you do that about Lazarus and you do it about Jairus, but then when Jesus does it, you're like, yeah, I've heard that story. I feel like that could happen now within this narrative world. We don't stop there, though. We don't think, oh, this is just how good stories end. For us, that gives us life, and it shapes the way we think about baptism. It shapes the way we think about communion. It gives us hope for our own lives, this idea of what we could be after we die, and that resurrection might, probably does apply to us, or at least it's something good to work towards in our community together. But these texts are a part of lots of different stories. There's a famous argument in the Gospel of Thomas about how Mary could possibly be saved because she's a woman. And it comes through that in your resurrected life, you won't necessarily be male or female. You'll just be resurrected as this being that loves God and is connected to God. And so, we don't know what it'll look like. Some of these stories are kind of fun, like Jesus walks through walls at some point, but can eat things and it stays inside. Like, that's kind of cool ghost story-like stuff that we can't figure out how it works. But we have lots of these stories of resurrection that don't necessarily stay within one scientific idea about what happens when people come back from the dead, because they do different things. One of the things I've been interested in is often they're hungry when they wake up from the dead. Right? Jesus wants to eat fish with people on the road to Emmaus. And the thing Jesus says to Jairus' daughter is, she's awake now, feed her. So maybe it makes you really hungry to come back from the dead? I don't know.
So sort of back up a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots and lots of stories, and most of us are going to say, that's ridiculous, that didn't really happen. And in history, lots of things were written in a symbolic way or a metaphysical way. So in all fairness to the white guys who did
Who weren't white, because you're
yeah,
accurate,
I
they
know.
weren't, there was
But-
Mediterranean.
But the question was, which of these stories are true enough or have enough truth or add to the understanding that we have of Jesus that they're useful to have in the Bible, which ones are just not, which ones are peripheral. So there's this process. Now, so the question is not whether those are true. I mean, the question about historicity, because we think of history different, is not so much did we miss ones that are true, but the questions usually are the ones we actually have true, or in what ways are they true? So that's more of the conversation. But the canon, undoubtedly with some errors, was created to pick the stories which help us most understand what we think is true about Jesus. We did a study in one of my churches when the Gospel of Judas came out, the Gospel of Judas thing came out, people were all woo about that. So I did a class at the church on the Gospel of Judas, and a bunch of people from the community came who weren't church people, right? And I said, okay, let's actually read this. They're going, that's it. They go, yeah, that's why the white guys kicked it out. I mean, it's a piece of crap, So the church is not keeping good stuff from you. The church, at least in this case, was saying this is why this isn't any good, and they all got that totally. And then I said, so if you want to read a better piece, let's come back next week and do Matthew or something. Nobody did, but
Maccabees. Yeah. So it just gives us ways to talk about what does it mean to come back from the dead? What does it mean to have resurrected life? What is it that we think hope is bigger than darkness? And I don't think any of them are like, aha, that's it, the way to do it. But it gets our conversations going and gets us curious about the creativeness of God to knit cells together and what's possible and what's not.
Another tie-up to Dry Bones and the Lazarus story for me is the role of the community in the text. In Ezekiel, the community is raised, and in Lazarus, the end of the text, when he comes out and he's bound, Jesus tells the people that are around him, unbind him and set him free. Mm-hmm. And there's just a sense that the community there plays a part in the new life and in the resurrection. I don't know, it just speaks to me.
Yeah, and unbinding in the Greek is the same word for forgiving sins, untying, unloosing. So if you imagine each knot of cloth coming off being a thing of guilt or shame that he was
One of the first Greek words we learned too.
It worked, yeah.
Like Scrooge. Scrooge, who's the one who has all the chains and he
Marley.
wants Scrooge? Yeah.
Marley.
Think of it like
These
that.
are the chains I have forged with my own, Marley.
Well,
Theater major.
Yes, yes.
See, I've got that one now.
Christmas Carol was my Christmas story for most of my life.
Yeah. The Mark text, I love Mark, favorite gospel.
It's coming up in
yeah.
December.
Oh, and,
Three of us, loving Mark.
Yeah, I love Mark.
Four of
holy
us.
cow, all right. It's
Mark is a
beyond the
favorite.
trifecta.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So, but the thing I like about Mark throughout the gospel is his use of immediately. But here in this text,
There's
we
no
don't have it
immediate.
immediately.
Mm-mm.
We've got this, and so for Mark, I mean, normal time would be, and you normally have this wait, but for Mark, who's always immediately does this, then you've got this long, you're talking about time, the difference of time, and for Mark, so this waiting period is like, ooh, I mean, it's excruciatingly long in the Gospel of Mark.
So Mark is really, Mark was the first chronologically of our Gospels to be written. We have them in our Bible, they're Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But if we look at when they were chronologically written, Mark is the earliest of our 4 Gospels. And it is our shortest Gospel. And you get a lot of this immediately. Within the first 15 verses, you're already past John the Baptist and Jesus' baptism, and he's calling people as disciples. I mean, it's just so
Roadrunner
fast.
of.
There's no
Transition.
Christmas story. There's no talking about Jesus in the temple as a kid. There's none of that. It's just this
Starts at his
really-
baptism.
It starts at his baptism, and it's just so fast, super flyby. And the gospel just tumbles and tumbles and tumbles, and you get these odd moments where there's this like, we're going to stop here for a minute. We're going to take a look at this. Okay, and we're going again. Until you get right up to the foot of the cross, and you can, and it
And then it's
slows
just over.
right down. Well, the whole last section of the entry into Jerusalem and up through the cross and the death takes a significant portion of the Gospel of Mark. I mean, it slows right down, so you really dwell at the foot of the cross. And in the original, the oldest transcripts of the Gospel of Mark that we have, there is no resurrection story. It just leaves with the women leaving the tomb in fear. And that's the end of the Gospel.
And they tell no one.
So
they tell
there's a
no.
resurrection
So you
story,
have
they
to.
just don't, they haven't
don't.
seen the
They
second
haven't
appearance.
seen it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
They
not.
run in
right.
fear. And
They
it's-
run in fear.
Yeah.
So for this to take as many verses as we have here, 21 through 43, for this story about Jairus' daughter and the woman who's hemorrhaging, is a big deal. That's a lot of verses in the Gospel of Mark to spend on this. And there's, we have this, it's kind of this structure of a story within a story. So we start out with a story about this little girl, my little girl who's at the point of death, and come heal her. And then we have this story within the story where Jesus is walking, and a woman who's been hemorrhaging, who's been bleeding for 12 years. So she wouldn't have been able to be a part of community. She would have been outside the community. She would have been unclean the entire time. She would have had to live outside the city walls. All of the pieces that would keep her from being a part of it, she didn't care about any of that. She went into the crowd and touched his cloak, knowing that she would find healing in that way. And she fought her way into that, broke all those taboos, desperate for this healing. And after 12 years, she is healed and restored to community. And then you hear this next section where when Jesus arrives to heal this young girl, she is 12 years old. So it's this girl's entire lifetime that this woman has been outside of community. And then he goes in this really weird situation where he goes up to the room where the child is dead, and instead of her being close to dead, now she's dead, and people are weeping, and Jesus says, don't worry about it. Child's not dead, just sleeping. They laugh at him. He sends all of them outside, takes the parents, goes upstairs, takes her by the hand and says, Talitha kum, which means, little girl, get up. And immediately, that's the first immediately in that section, immediately the girl gets up and begins to walk around. And then we have this interesting, she was about 12 years of age. And then he tells them not to tell anybody what happened, because of course nobody outside is gonna, think weird, where they've just been weeping and wailing because the girl is dead, and now all of a sudden they're saying go feed her. So it's a really interesting there's another immediately. In 30, there's immediately her hemorrhaging stopped. In 29, and immediately aware the power had gone away from him. So those are kind of moments of action. They happen immediately. So
And why does Jesus order them not to tell anyone?
isn't that
He does
a
that
great
a lot.
question?
Yes.
In the Gospel of Mark, he does that a lot, particularly in the passages that take a whole chapter to tell the story. So he first does that in the Gospel of Mark. There's a story of a man named Legion, which is the name of the Roman soldiers, who is thought to have lots and lots of demons, and he puts them into pigs, the mascot of the Roman soldiers, and drowns them into the ocean. And this is the first guy in the text who gets who Jesus is and wants to follow him. Everyone else, he's like, come follow me, this way. And he says, I'd like to follow you. And he goes, why don't you go tell everybody? And it's this one time he's kind of telling this guy to kind of go away. But every other time he's encountering someone, he's saying, don't tell anyone. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is a lot like a pastor who needs a sabbatical but hasn't had one yet. He's running away anytime there's a crowd coming. And this text, something really interesting happens with Jesus' power, the word dunamai in the Greek, where it says the woman with the hemorrhage touches him and he notices the power has gone out of him.
Mm-hmm.
My wondering is if that's a significant moment. If you think of Jesus as the Duracell bunny, whose power has a limit in the Gospel of Mark. Not in the other Gospels, but in the Gospel of Mark he seems to have a limited amount. And so when big crowds are coming and they're taking his power, he's not having choice about what he's saving in the world and what he's transforming. And here this woman touches him and takes it away. And this story, I think, is the last story in the Gospel of Mark where he's able to heal anyone. Because one of the next stories that comes up is there's someone who is dead, and the disciples are unable to raise that person from the dead because even the disciples' power has all run out. And some stranger who's not a part of them, who's preaching weird stuff, is able to rise that person from the dead. And you get this sense that Jesus is relieved someone still has power that hasn't run out yet in this story. And so it's hard to tell if in this story Jesus has got a really short time clock, you know, like the sands of the hourglass, and he's kind of counting each grain of sand. So maybe he's not wanting big crowds to come because he'll run out of power. Maybe he's not wanting people to, maybe you want to look like the person in the story who's not full of themselves and conceited, because there were a lot of people claiming to be messiahs by saying, I'm the guy, I'm the guy. So if you have a guy saying, I'm not the guy, maybe that's the one who really is. Like, it depends on how you think God would be present in the world. But
And all
there's
that said, I laugh when you
bazillion
asked the
books out
question because scholars have been asking that question
For
for
years.
hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Because it's called the messianic secret. Nobody, I mean, there's a bazillion reasons that people give why Jesus might have said, don't tell anybody. Nobody agrees, nobody knows.
Yeah.
It runs through all of
Because
them.
one of the other theories is that no one's going to get him until after the resurrection. That they have this idea of who Jesus is. He's coming. It's the military reign. That's the Messiah. But Jesus says you don't get it yet. That's then at the resurrection, the post-resurrection story or the post-resurrection Jesus.
It could also be that these stories were all written at least 150 years after he died. And so when you're telling this story, if you have a new one no one's heard before, and they say, well, how come we didn't hear that one before? You could be like, well, he told us not to tell you. So, I know it's a really good one, but... So,
Well,
I mean,
I
it just,
just wondered if maybe he was simply buying time
right.
so that he could complete his ministry before
Right.
he was killed.
The more they knew what he was up to, the quicker
This-
that cross was going to come.
Exactly, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Any other thoughts before we turn to worship and hear about Lazarus from our preaching? Any other thoughts on these texts? And we call them zombie texts because I think that our definition of zombie was people who come back to life from death. And zombie is so popular in our culture right now, and for whatever reason, whether it's because The Walking Dead is a great show and has, is a hit, or whatever the reason is, I think I have seen more.
It's the new vampire.
It's the new vampire, right? I've seen more zombies on my Facebook feed for Halloween than even Elsa or Anna, which is pretty impressive given the demographic that my Facebook
But the
feed
news
is full of.
says that Elsa and Anna
Are
win
they the
out.
top?
They're the
Did they
top,
win?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
the top.
It's there, well, and probably among the littles, I can
Yeah.
totally see that, and among the kind of the tweens to teens to 20s and early 30s, I'm seeing an awful lot of zombies. And so what is it about this idea of things that have died and are coming back to life, but not for good? Like, they're not, the zombies that are in our culture, that are so popular right now, are not coming back in order to do good things. They're zombies that are coming back in order to eat our brains, and to infect us and kill us all. So what is it that we are bringing that such a high place, rather than stories like these, where these people are being brought back to life in order to live good life, and in order to save our world, in order to bring hope and healing and blessing into our world. And So how do we, as people of faith, as Christians, reclaim the image of a zombie? So that it is not just about eating brains and making other people miserable, but this is a proclamation of grace and new life and potential for the kingdom of God.
Like a zombie reformation.
So-
A zombie reformation!
Let's-
I call for a zombie
Zombie
reformation. Let's give them a makeover. They have really bad
Yeah,
rap.
Right.
Okay, I'm gonna change all that when I.
Yeah.
Well, it's the Romans text. It's the tying zombies into the worship in the sense of new life as we remember our baptism as you were mentioning, we go through the death and the resurrection.
And crave the blood of communion.
Exactly. You talk about the hard teaching. This is hard teaching. You will eat my body and you will
Yeah.
drink my
Don't say
blood.
yeah, say no, that's
No,
not
no,
what they
no.
call.
I'm not going there at all.
I did it with a wink, if you can't see
Yeah,
that
yeah,
live
that's-
stream.
You wouldn't do non-camera.
Yeah. What we said, well, yeah.
You can't take my baptism away.
No way. No.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
thank you.
Yeah.
Shall we move towards
Worship.
our worship service? We are going to be stepping towards the Beatles Mass, and this, we do have copyright permissions for those who are concerned about this.
That's right.
We do have a license to.
On the
be-
last page.
From
On the
the
last page.
Yeah, from the Beatles.
Courtesy of BMI, licensed by Christian Copyright Solutions, perform music and worship cast. So we do have this license. If you are interested in knowing more about using the Beatles Mass at your congregation, that would be something to contact Pastor Megan Rohr about, as Megan wrote the lyrics for this, and would be happy to talk to you about how you might go about using this within your setting.
Okay. And we're gonna stop the live stream. We'll start it again when we're ready for worship,
We'll
so
be back in a
run to
minute.
the bathroom.